Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Kristy Taylor, founder of Work Solutions LLC, career and executive coach, and most importantly, someone who's committed to promoting inclusive workplaces and championing diversity. I'm so excited to kick off to this summer series for the DiversityWORxKS Round Table Series, and we have some awesome guests. Now, I'm going to start this by making a statement up front. We recognize that as leaders that diversity initiatives are being challenged. But we, as experienced coaches, practitioners, and individuals who have worked in this space, we're committed to carrying the mission forward. And you know, our motto here at Work Solutions is that we recognize that it takes work, WORXK, which is like, we like to say that we are the prescription for change. So we're going to continue these initiatives. This is not a political platform, but this is a platform that brings together like-minded individuals to promote diversity, inclusion, and champion inclusive workplaces, which is what we're going to focus on today. Now, I would be remiss without saying, you guys see me wearing this sash, that part of my platform is not only for my business in terms of what I do through Work Solutions, is that I am also representing Maryland in the Miss Northern States pageant. And so part of my platform as Miss Maryland, Miss Northern States is to promote inclusive work environments. So we're still staying focused on our foundation. Now, with that being said, I want to give you a couple of statistics as we move into today's discussion, and everybody has an opportunity to really introduce themselves. So, you know, when we talk about inclusive workplaces, and you guys feel free as we jump into this discussion to really go in more in depth on these statistics. Companies with diverse leadership, they see a 19% higher revenue and 45% innovation income compared to less diverse teams. Then when we talk about it in terms of diversity, in terms of like generational, 76% of Gen Z employers are more likely employees are more likely to stay in organizations that actively support DEIA initiatives. And why do I say DEIA? Because sometimes we forget when we're talking about that inclusivity, that means individuals with disabilities, veterans. You know, this is an inclusive group. It's not just about race. Another statistic, employees at inclusive companies, they generate 2.3 times more cash flow per year per person and 35% more productive. And finally, 81% of employers oppose scaling back DEI efforts. So again, this is not a political discussion. This is actually us as leaders making the decision to keep the discussion going on the importance of inclusive workplaces. And so with that, I'm actually going to do a quick around the room. I'm going to have each of our guests to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Vulnavia Barclay and do a quick introduction, and then we'll move on and we'll get right into today's discussion.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Vulnavia Barclay. I'm a compliance advisor with a family-run investment firm called the Bamboo Fund. It's a frontier investment firm established to play an active role in the development of climate-resilient facilities for health and wellness and retirement. We are working on listing in the Eastern Caribbean, being the first digital tokenized investment. I'm also trying to onboard with possibly in the Jamaica area. I'm also a life strategist and a speaker. I have over just about 2 decades of compliance, fraud, anti-money laundering for some major banks. My recent employer was Bank of America, leading and helping up with their fraud and risk projects in the Florida area, and relocated to Raleigh, where I now live.
All right, thank you so much. And again, this group today, we talk about inclusive workplaces. This is an international community. So I'm just so glad now. If you're one of our frequent flyers, you've seen the book 1,000 times in terms of working with us. I want to quickly have Anthony Frisina introduce himself. Go ahead, Anthony.
Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Anthony Frisina. I'm the founder of Above and Beyond, Bridging the Gap to Accessibility and Inclusion. I have slick black brown hair, wearing glasses, a purple shirt, black, purple, and white tie. I'm here today to talk about, accessibility and inclusion and how fundamentally we can go from what's required and going above and beyond to include people with disabilities through the sake of through intention rather than obligation.
Thank you so much, Anthony. All right, and so if you also have tuned in with us for the mega, if you were a part of our mega, when we did our mega global coaches event, there was a 3-day event where there was so many of us coaches who came together, and that we had built a beautiful network, and so had an opportunity to meet Subhayu Bagchi. And so, thank you so much for being a part of today's panel. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kristy, and morning, everyone. My name is Subhayu. I am in Mumbai, India. I currently work for a newspaper called The Times of India, and have about 2.5 decades of work experience across Vodafone, Unilever, Kellogg, and largely been on the sales and marketing side. Became a coach about a couple of years ago because that's what I enjoy doing, working with people, helping them develop and become better individuals. And like Dr. Kristy said, Mega Global was the platform that brought us together. Inclusivity, yes, something very, very close to my heart. Hopefully during today's discussion, we'll get to share a few of my experiences on my journey. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to jumping into this discussion. And again, when we kicked off our Prescription for Career Success Summit, Colonel Paul Lawrence, I cannot, as an Air Force veteran, call you without saying, Colonel Paul, because it's always an honor to work with you. Tell us, go ahead and introduce yourself, and and we'll keep it moving.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kristy. The name is Paul Lawrence Vann, and I'm the founder of Wealth Building Academy, LLC, which is a leadership consultancy. And prior to starting my business, I was in the Air Force for 22 years. Now, I also had a break in service where I worked for Mobil Oil Company. And who taught me about diversity and leadership? It was Mobil Oil Company. And as a result, after I retired, I went to the Society of Human Resource Management. I became a diversity trainer, and I went all throughout the U.S. and Canada delivering programs for Fortune 500 companies, federal government agencies, the military, and schools. And I'm honored to be here today with you all, and I wish to share more about how inclusivity makes a tremendous difference in all of our lives, in addition to the workplace.
Thank you so much, Paul. And finally, Dr. Alisha Broughton, who's new to our platform, but is so excited to get another fellow military veteran. So, Alisha, introduce yourself, and then we're going to kick this conversation off.
Hi, my name is Dr. Alisha Broughton. I'm out of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, and it's an honor and a privilege to join you today. And one of the major reasons that I'm here today is to speak up about DEI in the educational setting. And I am a person with a disability, so I definitely can relate to it. I am the CEO of Unlimited Expectations Express, while I do coaching for people with disabilities. I have been a Jefferson Award winner for my advocacy work and DEI. I have been also a global platform speaker for Black Enterprise for speaking on economic diversity. I am a chaplain for the military, a hospital group, and also have now been branded as a consultant for DEI. We have a book. I'm actually at a conference right now. I don't know if you can see the book. The book is called Educators Arise, Voices of Change. So there's 7 teachers that have been selected by the National Education Association, in which we created this book. And we talk about what DEI looks like for teachers and students, for students that have IEPs, for staff that have disability issues. So it's a pleasure to be on the platform, and I'm just ecstatic to meet everyone on today.
All right, we're going to make sure that, if you got a book, whatever you got to plug, make sure you holding it up so that we can make sure that people have access to your information. Now, throughout the chat, my business, the person who makes this whole thing run, Jules, will be monitoring the chat. She will also be sharing the information from the speakers. But again, plug those books. And I want to give, before we get started with our first question, I do want to say that given the context, I want to say thank you to each of the speakers, because it takes a level of bravery to step forward and keep moving forward with these initiatives, despite the challenges that we may be experiencing and facing. Believe me, I contemplated with myself over several months, am I going to do this and launch these initiatives? But I appreciate each and every one of you being here today. And we're going to start the first round of questions with Anthony. If you watched this before, you know how it goes. Typically, the individual will shoot out the first question, and then it will go. The panel will bounce off of each other. usually for a 3 or 4 minute round. Okay, so Anthony, we are well known. We know each other well, and you often speak about moving beyond the minimum standards for accessibility. And so we talk about inclusion because people say DEI a lot, but you know, Dr. Taylor like to say DEIA, right? Because I don't want people to forget the context of it's not just about race, it's not just about gender, it's about accessibility, disability, accommodating different generations of people. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusive workplaces. So, Anthony, you speak about moving beyond minimum standards for accessibility. And so, from your perspective, what does true inclusion look like? And how can workplaces better support people with disabilities from day one?
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful question. True inclusion exists when nobody questions your presence, only your absence. You know, and when it comes to accessibility and requirements, we have to look above and beyond and exceed those requirements. We have the ability, we have the capacity, we have the wherewithal to do it. We have to utilize lived experience as part of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility components to ensure that those pillars are not foundationally met beyond, in Canada, where I'm from, the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, as well as the ADA in the US, giving that foundation and ensuring that the needs are exceeded for people with disabilities so that inclusion is not only a disclaimer, but inclusion exists when it's authentic and genuine in the workplace, you know, from hiring people with disabilities, having statements of disclosure, proper disclosure, to including inclusive cultures, to including people as part of your employee sector, having the opportunity and the education behind employees to ensure that they're able to actively do everything else anybody else without a disability can do.
You know what? Let's start with the conversation. I mean, Alisha, you mentioned that you have the experience as a disability advocate. So let me let you guys respond to Anthony's initial, response to his question.
So when it comes to accessibility and accommodations, I would say that practical measures, flexible work schedules, and there has to be different types of learning. So I'm going to be transparent and I'm going to talk about myself. So I have a traumatic brain injury. So for me, what does it look like in the workplace? It looks like sometimes I may have to have large font. I may have to have large print. And some of the things that I've actually encountered is things with confidentiality. So I would say that education is the foundation for just not only for those with disabilities, but also for our society. Diversity is the engine of creativity. Inclusion is the heart of social justice, and everyone should be treated equally. Inclusion means no one is left behind. So even in the educational system, you guys all heard of No Child Left Behind. Right now, with so many major cuts, it's going to cut out many of our kids with IEPs. What does that look like? There won't be any summer programs. There won't be any after-school programs for those students that may need it. There's not going to be any food programs. So
all right, Alisha, we're going to come back to that because I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to give everybody a chance to respond, okay? So, but I want to come back to that, and then I also want to come back to something that you and that Anthony said, that it was something that that slipped my mind, but it was like something you said about the presence of people, right? Nobody noticed a presence until you are gone, right? Or I want you to say that again, Anthony.
Inclusion truly exists when nobody questions your presence, only your absence.
Guys, let me give everybody a chance to respond to that. Paul, so keep your responses at 20, 30 seconds so that we can all get a chance to respond. Go ahead.
Right. And looking at what Anthony just stated, in fact, presence is really what the issue is. And if you have a leader, and when it comes to inclusion, it's all about the direction that the leader is taking each day. And they have to be able to address people who have the disabilities, because they do exist. And oftentimes when a person has a disability, people are not even aware of it. And so there's also that awareness piece, in addition to understanding that there is a difference, and you have to address that difference in a positive and constructive way.
Okay. Vinaya?
Yes, just to piggyback on what you said, Dr. Kristy, about diversity and inclusion, it is more than also neurodivergency, the way people take in and have information, the way they give out information. And so there's many things that encompass that. One statistic, just to mention what you said, actually 45%, according to Boston Consulting Group in 2018, 45% of average leadership diversity, they generate 45% of their revenue from innovation compared to 26% of companies with below average diversity. And so diversity does include a range of different types of work processes, how people work, how they're able to work, and different systems and things that are set up for that.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that because you mentioned neurodiversity, and Alisha was like really giving some great insight into what is happening in the system when we remove some of these programs that support these processes. So, Subhayu, go ahead and respond to Anthony's question in terms of, from your perspective, what does this look like when we're talking about supporting disabilities and inclusion?
I think it's a compelling business case. If we are not supporting people of the DEIA spectrum, there is a very, very immediate and clear business impact that any corporation experiences, because we tend to get sidelined with what they don't have and tend to forget what they do have. I think as an organization, it's important to focus on what is there rather than what is not, because what is not can't be influenced.
I love that. And I think that, again, we get so caught up in the context of that political dynamic of this concept of DEIA that we forget that it is inclusive. And, Alisha had some great points. We're going to circle back to when you remove some of this programming and support, people don't start to recognize the impact of what it is until it's not there, right? So we're going to, Vulnavia, you talked about some of your experiences in corporate and some of the things that you are trying to do as a coach. You bring a deep experience in compliance and financial systems. And so from your perspective and experience, how can inclusive practices be embedded in traditionally rigid and regulated environments like finance and compliance?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people assume, Dr. Kristy, that industries like finance and compliance are just too rigid for inclusive practices and that the rules don't leave room for change. But the truth is, inclusion and regulation, they don't compete. They actually need each other. Regulations tell us the minimum we have to do, but inclusion is about going beyond that, those design systems, those policies, and experiences that truly work for everyone, even in the disability space. And I think, as one of the panelists mentioned, is you may not even know that someone has a disability. And so you have to kind of think outside of the box and just really be inclusive with your practices. And the starting point is really shifting the mindset from how do we comply to how do we include while we comply. And it's about embedding inclusion into how we write policies, how we design products, how we build teams, how we govern risk. And it's not just nice to have, but we have it where it's actually a key to building stronger and more resilient organizations. And again, when I mentioned the statistic about revenue, a lot of companies, their bottom line is the dollar. And so having inclusion for the way people work, the knowledge that they can bring and the value that they can bring, even in a disability space, we try to forecast that. And it actually helps our company and our compliance frameworks to work much better, not only protecting the company, but creating an inclusive environment.
And so when we talk about that concept of inclusivity, I don't want to get us stuck in this one space of just the disability. We just happened to kick off with Anthony.
Sure,
but we are talking about disability. We're talking about racial and ethnic minorities, women and gender diverse individuals, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA. I mean, it is
yes.
It's LGBT, it's Pride Month, right? And then we're also talking about veterans and military connected individuals. We're talking about older workers and multi-generational teams, immigrants and refugees. So when we're talking about these inclusive working environments, we're talking about all of these dynamics. Now, we're going to keep going with this discussion. So how do you want to, somebody respond to her answer? And I love the fact that you pointed out that it's not about the rigidity, right, that people think in these heavily regulated industries. So, Paul, do you want to respond, or Anthony?
Sure, I'll respond. When we look at what Vulnavia stated, is that when we look at inclusivity, a lot of times people are thinking of gender and race or ethnicity, but it's a full aspect of who people are. Inclusivity exists around the entire world with all 8 billion people. And the reason why is because 8 billion people are all different from each other. None of us were created the same. And as a result, it's the inclusive world in which we live in. And I worked in that financial space for, I don't know, 16 years. And a lot of times it's not really about the policies, but it's actually about the program, the experience that one has that can help extend that process.
Love that. Alisha?
I think that a workplace that listens to every voice because it should be heard will strengthen the workplace. And inclusive workplace is seen daily in interactions by decision making through leadership. It's where employees feel safe to express who they are and what their identity is. Inclusion is a voice and should be present on every levels, like leadership, communities, decision making, as well, and influencing policies. Inclusion to me is creating environments where everyone is welcome, respected, and able to participate fully to its fullest.
I really love what you said there about, cultivating this at every level. And it's just not just a leadership level. So when we look at the diversity of workplaces, we look at the intergenerational, we look at racial makeups, people with disabilities, veteran and military. Like there's so many military folks, and that's gonna be something I'm gonna always be an advocate for, right? Because that's my background. But there are so many people who bring all of these different talents to the table. When we talk about inclusive work environments, how do you make decisions in a monolith, right? If everybody's thinking the same, now, yes, as leaders, we all want to be on the same page when we launch a major initiatives, but I love what she said about all levels. Subhayu, let me get your input and then we'll go to Anthony.
Yeah, I think, there are enough and more examples that diversity always strengthens. I mean, if you look at biology, you look at evolution, it is always diversity that makes any human unit stronger, be it a tribe, be it a nation, be it a workplace. The more diversity that we are able to bring in, the more comprehensive the strength of that organization, that unit becomes. The more exclusive we make it, the weaker that human unit tends to become. So that evolution, biology, chemistry, any field that you look at, it is always diversity that makes something stronger, and it is always exclusivity that makes anything weaker. So I think it is science, it is life, every indication that we have around us, it is that diversity makes any human unit stronger.
I love that. And the mere fact that we have not just, this panel is not a monolith, right? This panel is an international panel. To Paul's point, we have people all, we've never met in person, none of us, right? But it's through these different avenues that we've been able to connect with each other and engage with each other. And then let you have the last word on that, and then we're going to move to the next question.
Absolutely. And I'll start by saying that one person with a disability is one person with a disability. For those who don't know, I do use a manual wheelchair to navigate community, and it does present its challenges. Now, in the workplace, we need to look at things such as, individualized work plans. We talked about individualized education plans earlier, but what about things like individualized transit plans, individualized work plans to help amplify the success of all employees? Championing inclusion in the workplace really, sets a precedence in a culture that, everybody, makes the impact that benefits the corporation or the community or the workplace overall.
Yeah, I mean, to Alicia's point, is everybody's saying the same thing in terms of it has to be at all levels, right? Because, the way that culture strive is, one, making sure that individuals at all levels are supported and are able to contribute in that term of belonging. So some people, I say DEIA, some people say whatever we phrase it, right? But that feeling of belonging, we have to make sure, to me, it's so important to feel like I'm part of an organization. I'm a fit for an organization. And sometimes when we talk about this DEI conversation, we don't recognize that just, there was a video that someone played the other day at an event that I was at where these individuals took time to learn sign language. And as this couple was going through, they were able to sign and communicate with them because it's also about belonging. With that, let's move to the next question. So how you have a background in coaching and business leadership across really diverse industries. And you told us a little bit about that earlier. Now, how do you help leaders recognize and challenge biases in the workplace, right? Because we're talking all of this good, warm, fuzzy feeling stuff about, what needs to happen, but we also want to give solutions, right? Because now this is somebody who's been teaching cultural diversity and all of these years, and one of the things I said that we all have these, intrinsic biases, right? Things that we're unaware of, implicit biases, things that we're unaware of, because you can think that you are the most, connected person, but we all have a level of, I would say, unrecognized bias about ourselves. So, how do you help leaders recognize and challenge this bias in the workplace, and especially when you're leading across cultures and geographies?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Kristy, there are two parts to it, right? One is obviously how do you recognize that something like this is there in an organization? So I think the first thing is observation. There are words that are used. There is language that is used. Simple things like who is sitting where in a meeting. I mean, who is close to the table, who is far away from the table, who is close to the dais and who is far away from the dais. What kind of recruitment policies do I have? Are we consistently going back to the same set of colleges? Are we consistently going back to the same cultural background? These are all indications of bias in any organization. Now, obviously, it is there for a reason. Maybe there are people who have been beneficiaries of this bias, because we have to understand the reason why bias gets perpetuated is because there are people who have benefited from this bias. And because they have benefited from the bias, they keep perpetuating the same. Now, for someone to challenge this, it has to be done sensitively, because you are questioning how an organization has achieved success. The first thing that will be thrown at your face is, this is how we are, and this is what has brought us here. So it has to be done sensitively. Second, I think top management, leadership alignment, absolutely essential, because culture is defined over there. And what I have found in my experiences, and I think someone referred to it, is bring out the business impact of having a non-diverse, non-inclusive workforce. There are clear and proven business cases of what it does when you're not treading the DEIA path. And you have to make a business case out of it. You have to pick your battles. If there are 10 examples of bias, it could be race, it could be culture, it could be gender, it could be ability. We cannot bite the whole thing at the same time. We have to pick our battles. We have to take it step by step. We have to be respectful and we have to be sensitive. Because if I'm inside, will I be able to influence it? If I'm plucked from the inside and thrown outside, then that's it. The problem continues. So I think recognition through observation and solutions through picking battles respectfully and sensitively would be my two pieces on the table for the rest of the panel.
Wow, I love that. Let's just go right over to Paul. Paul, I keep on calling you first. So let's go to Dr. Alisha, right, and get her input, and then we'll bounce around.
I would say limited culture competencies without understanding diverse culture backgrounds and the experiences of employees and clients, organizations may risk misunderstanding and really what inclusion is. So we definitely have to hold leadership accountable. Leaders have to set boundaries for equitable treatment and hold themselves and their teams accountable. So accountability is major in understanding exactly what inclusion is. We must invest with ongoing education. We must foster dialogue. Sometimes dialogue can be very difficult, and ensure that policies and practices are implemented, holding people accountable. So it starts with the leadership and it trickles on down. Without leadership commitment, how can inclusion actually work? I said inclusion affects risk becoming superficial, but when leaders embed and are willing to be a part of the decision making and change the daily interactions that are not accurate, then this is where inclusion begins. with ongoing dialogue, inclusive workshops where people are trained about DEI can alleviate many biases, employee resource groups, mentorship groups. And the key that we also need to look at is the mental health component of how people with that are excluded, how it affects them emotionally and mentally. So
I love that because we're gonna come back to that. Let me let you wrap up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I would say just having listening circles, but it all starts with the leadership at the very top.
Yeah, we're gonna come back to that mental health component too. But it was just a couple of things that so how you said there that really got me to thinking about positioning in the room, paying attention to where people sit, how they position themselves. Because we all of those things that Alisha said, it's like, okay, those are things that as somebody who does this work, we advocate for that. But I never even thought about that, right? That the positioning of how people are positioned in the room and paying attention, that's a deeper level. And then the other piece I would love to hear you guys comment on too is, what do you do? Because sometimes that is what happens when we're driving cultural change. People who have systematically benefited, right? That you don't even know, because you're so comfortable in that space, you don't necessarily recognize, like, I've actually benefited from this culture that was already here. So you don't necessarily recognize the fact that there are people who might not be experiencing the same experiences as you, right? When we talk about disability and having to ask for those accommodations, or we talk about women and equitability in the workplace. Vulnavia, what is your comment perspective on this? And then we'll jump
sure. First of all, the world is global. So it's, as much as we don't, maybe we don't want to talk about DEI, or there's some tough conversations around that, the entire world and different businesses and what they're trying to do, it is global. One thing I like that he did mention is that the tough conversations are needed. You just have to call out and educate, and it starts with leadership as well. And the hard part is that people know that their companies thrive in a more diverse environment. However, a lot of people have benefited from not having to branch out or discuss DEI, but they benefit from having DEI programs. So I think it does start with leadership, and I think it's just having the conversations, having the support and education in companies that discuss it, and just calling it out. And the unspoken biases too. What do those look like? What do those look like if you are an individual and you have some of them, those unspoken biases? So
yeah, I mean, I think that we have to just admit that we all have them implicit bias, right? When I teach cultural competency classes, I have students take the Harvard implicit bias test because we all, when we talk about prejudice, it's just sometimes prejudice is just a lack of knowing, right? And I love what you said too about globalization. In any communications class, that probably any of you, if you taught those classes, one of the things that we mention is globalization. The world is not just like we talk about the issues and challenges that we have here in the U.S. The world is not just the U.S. The world is the world. And when you're doing a lot of this work, when we talk about globalization and the future of what the workplace looks like, that is an inclusive environment. I have clients who come to me for coaching, for example, or if I'm teaching, English classes, they might be doing interview prep, and they want to learn how to, something as simple as, I don't know what an idiom is, like some of the terminology that we use in English, right? What does that mean? And that is a part of diversity, right? It's teaching them and helping them to understand it. Paul, let me get a response for you, then we'll go to Anthony.
Well, that one statement that people say sometimes in organizations is, but we've always done it this way. So we're talking about change management here. And oftentimes organization, it takes a while for it to actually put these processes and systems in place. But what it encompasses is the fact that when we first look at that leader must understand self-awareness. They must understand what they need to do to change, make a part of that change management even improve. So that self-awareness, and the only way to do that is through self-leadership. And once that leader at the top understands what they need to do, then they can help the people that work for them. And I have this book here, Leadership is Influence, and it really lays out and makes a case for people understanding how to become the best leaders they can be. And then once the person at the top makes this change, then it can flow down through the organization, through the managers, through the employees, even through the subcontractors who work for an organization in a workplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's really leadership accountability. You make me go pull out my book because I did so much research on my framework, the RBT DEI framework, right? And who you get ready to launch the framework, go out and speaking at organizations, and then we run into these challenges with DEI. But the framework itself doesn't change because literally the name of the book is a transformative approach to leading change and fostering organizational resilience within social impact, leveraging DEIA. And it's to that point of what you just said is because as leaders, right? Leaders have to take a look at themselves. And that is when you look at yourself and you recognize, sometimes I think leaders don't understand their sphere of influence, right? If you don't check your own implicit bias, and it doesn't mean that we talk about this stuff in this space and promoting inclusive work environments, it doesn't mean that we're having kumbaya campfires, right? We're just recognizing that as leaders, we understand our sphere, our circle of influence. And so we start with self-examination. And then we also leverage this to look at our culture, organizational culture, because to me, if you can facilitate these discussions around some of the challenges and issues that may be happening from a DEIA perspective, then you literally can leverage that to lead any type of change in your organization. Because one of the things, again, I call my framework the REBT framework, because if you're familiar with cognitive models of therapy, rational emotive behavior therapy means that we are literally looking at the root cause of issues and challenges, right? And we're cleaning out these things that influence our culture. Anthony, let me have you respond, and then we're going to move to our next question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to look at DEI as a foundation rather than a feature. As a person with a disability, if I have to keep begging for an accessible washroom in a public space, how am I ever going to belong? We have to look at beyond the requirements, beyond the minimum standards, and seeking knowledge from those with lived experience. We have to look at things such as, building those foundations, building those accessible and inclusive and diverse workspaces through the lens of lived experience. I've always said that lived experience doesn't get the notoriety nor the respect that it deserves beyond what we are required to do as a community. So that's why I created my brand entitled Above and Beyond, and there's my book here. Above and Beyond goes beyond the minimum standard, goes beyond the status quo, and voices need to be heard. We talk about voices and inclusion, voices and belonging at the table. But if the voice, it goes beyond actually being heard and action being implemented through the voices of lived experience. Oftentimes we live in a reactive society. We live reactionary until something happens to somebody. Until something happens to somebody, we act, very impulsively. And so we need to think of inclusion as a foundation rather than a feature.
Love that. Paul, because that actually builds on what we're about to ask in this next question, which is, Paul, drawing from your experience, as a military leader and certified DEIA trainer, what are some key lessons in discipline, accountability, structure that corporate leaders can adopt to drive inclusion more effectively? Because to Anthony's point, he shouldn't have to keep asking, right?
Yes, when it comes to military discipline, it's all about that operational integrity. And when we look at it from a corporate perspective, it's all about modeling inclusion daily, such as listening, active listening, seeking diverse perspectives, and using inclusive language as a part of that discipline. When it comes to accountability, of course, in the military, everyone is accountable for the mission. Everything counts. And then when we look at it from a corporate standpoint, of which I worked at Mobile Oil Company for a couple of years, you have to tie inclusion metrics to leadership performance reviews. It must be an evaluated competency. And that's one reason why they put me in the diversity for professionals as an employee of Mobile Oil Company, because they wanted me to understand that we have to have a different perspective of things. I had to switch from the military hat, flight cap, to the corporate hat and wearing that. And then when we look at it from a structural standpoint, the military is all about the missions, the clarity, and other standard operating protocols. But from the corporate side, You want to design some inclusion into systems and not make them so much of a slogan, but actually practice them and move intention to operational integrity. So that's part of how to help it. And then you can also create some employee resource groups as well with command level sponsorship. And that would really help in the corporate space.
I want to bounce this over to Alisha because she has that experience too. And she's also mentioned some of these very things that you just kind of talked about. So my point here is it really is no different, whether it's the military style or whether it's you took a lot of what you had in, me too. A lot of the experiences I've had in the military and brought that over to the corporate side. So Alisha, let me get your input and then we're going to bounce this question around to everybody else as well.
I think it also should be built on building trust through consistency and also compassionate communication, because trust doesn't happen overnight. So we have to build trust within our communities. It's built by showing up and being a reliable listener. I can say with a person with a disability, having to keep going back and asking for the same accommodations can be difficult. But just when they're showing up for me, that lets me know that they're there. When I have to every other day remind you that I need the accommodations, that means you're not showing up for me. That means that it's inconsistent and there needs to be conversation. And I said some cultures resist inclusion. They do. They resist inclusion because they're fearful. They don't understand. It's misunderstood. The goals are misunderstood, and they feel like sometimes that they may be sued. So they're kind of fearful about what it looks like. Organizations can begin by breaking down this barrier by engaging all levels of their staff in conversations about the benefits of inclusion and sharing success stories. So there can be success stories that are shared as well. Inclusion is more than just checking off a box or having a meeting. It's more than that. So many times, okay, I've met the DEI qualifications or regulations. I'm just checking off a box that I met it. But what about the person that actually feels like they're being included? You're just checking off a box, but are the individuals really being included? Organizations should focus on meaningful inclusion, ensuring diverse voices of influence, creating equitable opportunities, and fostering a sense of belonging in the workplace. So hopefully I've answered your question.
I think you have, and I love the fact that you just talked about, checking off the box. So what's your response to that?
I just have to add that it also comes with a cost. And fundamentally, to ensure accessibility and inclusion and accommodations in the workplace, 90% of accommodations can be accommodated with a price tag of $500 or less. So, when we ensure inclusion, we have to make sure that we have everybody's needs met, whether you're a consumer to the business, an employee in the business, whether your needs are met. Now, you look at the pandemic. If anything that taught us, we've been doing a lot of Zoom interviews. Today, for example, we're all meeting globally because of the pandemic, or it's a big reason of that because of the technology that has evolved due to that pandemic. People are now working from home. People are now getting those accommodations. People are now getting their needs met, and therefore becoming more inclusive workplaces and spaces. But there's still a lot more work to be done.
I mean, 100% agreed. And then we see this big push to bring people back to the office. So Anthony's responded. So Subhayu, what is your response?
No, I think as an organization, we treasure what we can measure, right? I think it's very important that we set goals. And the goals are not fuzzy, warm goals. These are objective, measurable, time-bound goals. Only then will we see a step change in how the entire DEI agenda moves forward. I think what I've seen in organizations is that, yes, there is a statement of intent. There is a very nice statement of purpose, but that intent and purpose does not get transported or transformed into something that you can measure. Until you are able to measure it, it remains in the realm of intent and doesn't really impact or doesn't really become action.
One of the things that I talk about in my book around my framework is the process of decatastrophization. And again, if you're familiar with the REBT model, this cognitive model, decatastrophization is you're identifying the root cause, but then you actually put in parameters. And what does that look like from an HR perspective? Decatastrophization is actually we as an organization, we identify the challenges, right? And we're not just going to talk about it. We are going to be about it by putting policies in place. This is our stance, and this is the expectation. If your behavior or whatever it is doesn't fall in line with that, then that is going that impacts the work. So that from an organizational standpoint, decatastrophization is not only identifying but also putting parameters in place. Let me get a comment from Vulnavia, and then we're going to do our last question.
Sure. So going back to the organizational operational leadership, DEI means moving diversity, equity, inclusion from just being a statement on the website to being part of business, how businesses are run every day. It's not just about having a policy, it's about building inclusion into operations, decisions, and leadership decisions that drive results. And embedding it means embedding it like in the hiring process when you're doing vendor selection, promotions, product design, and also tracking, how our other voices being heard. And it moves from just being an initiative to more of a system, to just embedding it in that system and making it more of a cultural norm. Because we're not really just talking about DEI or just inclusion, it's just moving into how leadership is delivered every day. And like we spoke of a little bit with globalization and what the world looks like, and creating inclusive environments that, like you stated, we have so many different generations. We have veterans, boomers, Gen Y. We have, just diversity in itself is the world, and it represents. And if you want to have a corporation that envelops that, some of those policies should be more integrated. It should become to the point where we don't even have to speak of DEI, because it is, it's just part of it.
Right. And we can't address DEI without actually addressing DEI. I mean,
Right.
because we're not taking into the factor that the systematic and systemic issues that have always existed. We globally as people, and how do I just say this, keeping it, on that politically correct spectrum, we didn't create the system. We literally are living in it. And so again, when you've benefited from a system for so long, you kind of don't realize like, hey, I'm benefiting from this. It wasn't until like a lot of these policies were removed that people who thought it didn't apply to them recognized like, oh, it applies to me too, right? You didn't realize you were actually benefiting from some of these components. So with that,
I just have to add.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Cook. I just want to add quickly to close the conversation here, is that preaching patience is granting permission to procrastinate. And you have to be in a society and in a mindset that, we no longer can wait our turn. We need to be proactive in our systems and including people of all cultures and all diversities to ensure an empathetic and active environment in workplace and culture.
And we can't have
it really does take a level of productivity. I'm gonna throw this last question out to Dr. Broughton, because she said quite a mouthful today in terms of like it can't just be a checklist. She talked about mental health, and so Dr. Broughton, you have worked with at-risk populations and underserved communities for decades, right? And so when we talk about this stuff, what can employers do, learn from your work when it comes to supporting employees through trauma, transition, or personal challenges in inclusive ways?
So some of the things is just through educating, like for at-risk youth or even adults. We have to be educated. What does cultural diversity look like? We have to have conversations about identity, different cultural backgrounds, what's food like in different cultures, just talking and understanding. I say teachers are frontline agents in DEI through modeling inclusive behavior, incorporating it in the school system into our lessons, because all kids are included. So what does that look like? I may have Johnny in the back of the classroom, and I may think that Johnny doesn't understand, but there may be a language barrier. Or I may have Susie sitting up front and is not responding, maybe because Susie can't read. But just building relationships effectively. a lot of students in the classrooms are going through a mental health crisis. Before they even come to school, they're dealing with drama at home. If I come to school and I haven't eaten, that affects my ability to learn. Some students may be in foster care, so it looks different mental health wise. I work in a juvenile detention center. And with that being said, most of the kids that I work with have committed major crimes. But you said it all, the core root of the problem. What is the core root of the problem? Why are these kids having these mental health issues? Mental health is very important. So understanding the core concepts and backgrounds of those that we're working with, understanding the core concepts and making sure that the kids understand what's going on, understanding that HR understands what's going on, and just overall having these overall conversations also can prohibit some of the mental health issues and factors. I can say this for teachers. I have recently went to our union and I said, hey, if I'm having a mental health breakdown from things that are going on around me, I need a mental health day off. Create a mental health day off for teachers. Like, it's better for me to take off than for me to have a mental health breakdown. So just understand the concepts of what mental health looks like.
Yeah, because some people will say, hey, it's not our job to do that. But you guys, I mean, hey, I'm a teacher too, certified to teach here in the DC area. Yes. So all these jobs, I've had them. Okay. That's why I'm a career coach. And it's just like, okay, you know, we're on what the kids are dealing with, right? But we're also having to deal with ourselves and all of the pressure. So we got about 2 minutes on this discussion. So let me get a response from Vulnavia and then we'll go to the next person. So quick response from Vulnavia.
Sure. Just to piggyback with what she said, yes, you need these programs, and you can't have both. You can't have the benefit from DEI, but not have DEI or some sort of inclusive framework embedded into your organization, no matter what you do. If you have a large corporation or you're a self-entity, you know, you can't, you do have to challenge the status quo, because you can't have both. You can't have the benefit and not have the program or the diverse environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Again, people think, I gave some categories of DEI, but people just think, oh, it's about race, or even it's just about disability. It is really about people. What about women who are pregnant? It's about, you know, supporting mental health, older workers and multi-generational teams. I'm just throwing that out there. LGBTQIA communities. It's like, you can try to wipe people off, because I teach history too. You can try to wipe people off the face of the planet by changing up history or changing the narrative, right? But it still happened, and there are those people who, like me, who collect thousands of books and documents, because however we change it, it still happened. And so the systematic and systemic issues that are as a result of that are still there. And so, believe me, what I truly believe is that as challenges, there will be a generation that rises up, and they're gonna put this stuff right back in front of us, because it's not the way the universe works. Is you can't just. It has to be addressed, right? Anthony, let me get a response from you.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's about, you know, access to public spaces. If I don't have access to public spaces, private spaces, like anybody else, like transit, for example, if that's not available, you know, that's going to, you know, increase in isolation and by extension increase, you know, mental health, and it's becoming more and more a barrier for, you know, people within the disabled community, you know, access, whether it be tangible or intangible access, the availability of services. And that's going to really amplify that that mental health barrier that was spoken about earlier.
I mean, again, it's a loop, right? You don't have access to transportation, but people want you to come to the office. How do you get there, right? So it starts with that foundational piece of community. We're running short on time, so I'm gonna get 2 more quick responses, and then we'll do our around the room. Subhayu, you want to give a quick response?
Yeah, I think.
Subhayu?
Yeah, no, I think, like I mentioned, it comes down to you know, the impact, whether you have a policy or not. The true impact is when you ask people. So if you ask people, is this making a difference to your life, is when you will know that the needle has moved. And the more check-ins we do, and we do a genuine check-in, not a tick box activity, okay, tell me the da. No, it doesn't work that way. You need people who are sensitive, you need people who are aware, and you need people to constantly check in to understand if the policies are making an impact, if the actions that you're taking, are they making an impact? Because you can have all kind of matrices, you can have all kind of measures, but till the time the individual feels the impact and expresses it as such, I think it's a journey that is still to be done. So checking in regularly, understanding whether the people who you intend to impact are feeling the impact. Till that happens, I think it's a journey that needs to continue.
Amazing. This really has been an amazing discussion, and we're going to end it right here because, Paul, you're going to give your final response, but then I also want you to do, again, your shameless plug. You got about 30 seconds, and then we're going to go around the room, final response, and so we can wrap this conversation up.
Yes, thank you so much. And what it really comes down to for me is that the people at the top have to model what they want their particular organization and their employees to do. They must use emotional intelligence. They must have empathy. They must know how to have active listening and ensure if they ask the question, well, is this office inclusive? You will know by observation whether or not it is, because you will get the results from that organization as a result of that. And one last time, leadership is influence. You have to be able to influence people to do work that they really don't want to do, but yet they do it because they trust you and they want the best for the organization itself.
Exactly. But maybe you're going to give your final, final response, final plug. Where are you going to be at? What are you doing? What's happening?
Sure. So you can find our investment firm and the exciting things we're doing at www.bambfoofund.com. I'm also just now building and gearing up to start my coaching and consulting life strategy firm, The Alchemist Consulting and Coaching. You can find me on LinkedIn until such time. So Vulnavia Barclay on LinkedIn, and see some of the things that I will be working on. And it's been a great discussion today. So thank you all.
You're very welcome. Alisha, you want to give your plug? We are dropping your information in the chat. We're going to make sure that also we send it out to everybody who signed up. We share it. So we have the safe space, which I run. We share that information with like 1,400 women in that group. So we definitely are sharing your stuff.
You can find me on my website, www.dralishabroughton.com. I am launching an online coaching business. I'm already there, but I've expanded it to deal with culture diversity as well. And I have a release of a book on August the 1st, and it's geared towards people that have disabilities in the workplace. And in closing, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, any of the platforms, and also on YouTube. And in closing, to ensure inclusion make sure inclusion goes beyond just the check boxes. Thank you for the invite on today.
Welcome, Anthony. Final thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. Again, as the founder of Above and Beyond, Bridging the Gap to Accessibility and Inclusion. I'm an author, actor, speaker, television host on Cable 14 here in Hamilton. That's www.cable14.com. And my website is anthonyfrisina.ca. And again, here's my book. And we talked about the importance of leadership. And personally, I've taken that step locally to put my name in the hat for a by-election that's happening here in Hamilton for the ward that I currently live in and work in Ward 8. So I'm looking to actually change by leadership. Also, it's important to note that where there's a win for accessibility and inclusion, there's a win for everybody. Thank you.
That. And so how we are dropping again. We're dropping your stuff in the public chat, so we are dropping everybody's information. So how again, it was so great to meet you, Mega Coaches panel. So go ahead, share what's up next. Plug.
Yep. So I'm available on LinkedIn, first name, last name. I'm available on Instagram, first name, last name, first name. So I've dropped it in the chat. So very happy to connect with people around the globe and look forward to connecting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Listen, I want to say again, it takes leadership that in challenging times for people to step up and want to move forward with these discussions. The discussions don't stop. The solutions don't stop. This was a discussion not just based on how people are feeling, because again, we don't get into political dynamics. This was a discussion where people laid the foundation and offered up some real solutions. And we're going to keep this going throughout the summer, through September. We have a book project launch, and I have to do my plug for our conference that we had a couple months ago, Prescription for Success. You can find this book. This book was a #1 bestseller. And we talk about diversity. There were 15 coaches who gave their input across the spectrum in terms of writing this and sharing. Prescription for Success, elevate your mindset, transform your career, #1 bestseller. And again, stay tuned for some of the other DiversityWORxKS initiatives that we have going on. Shout out to Miss Northern States pageant. Shout out to all of our speakers today. Thank you for coming on this platform and doing the work that you do. You guys have a great day. I'm going to end the stream because we definitely want to get people to the replay. Thank you guys for all who tuned in. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Have a great day, everyone.